So to start off, I think it would be very interesting to hear kind of a history of, well, when did women go into college? You know, what was essentially higher education for women, and what were the expectations that people had?
Well, as you may know, the first college in the United States, Harvard, was here from 1636, and then there were a few more throughout the 1700s, and women were to be found nowhere in those institutions. So the first colleges in the United States were men only. They were planned for men. They were planned so that these men could become leaders of the new state, so they could become ministers, maybe so they could become lawyers, although that wasn't really entirely necessary. But women were not seen as needing higher education. We couldn't imagine women taking any of those roles, so why would women really need to go to higher education? So for the longest time, then, we had just a small number of men's institutions, and it really wasn't until about the mid-1800s, around the 1830s, 1840s, that you started to see colleges opening for women. The interesting thing to keep in mind is today we know what a college is and what a high school is. We know if something is a college or not, but that's not really the case when you talk about the history of higher education. You had things that were academies or seminaries or called themselves colleges but weren't really very collegiate. So for women, for the most part, women were invited into these institutions. Where I work at Wheaton College in Massachusetts, we started out as Wheaton Female Seminary. And while today we would think that meant they were training clergy, it really wasn't the case at all. It meant that that was a less than collegiate experience. So for women, it really wasn't until about the mid-1830s, 1840s, Oberlin College in Ohio, which opened in 1833, was the first and only school that opened to men and women at the same time and to African American and white students at the same time. Other than that, it's going to take until the 1860s, 70s, and 80s for the schools that we tend to know of, Wellesley, Vassar, Smith, those schools that started as women-only institutions. Then as you get to some of the schools that people are more familiar with, we had the Morrill Land Grant Act. People have often heard of a land grant university. Well, that was federal money. And those institutions didn't think they were going to start it as coeducational, but when women started knocking on the door in Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, they realized that the law didn't prohibit them, so we guessed we had to open it for them.
Although there was a little resistance.
There was often resistance, yes.
So when parents were sending their daughters to college, you know, especially as there were more educational opportunities available to them, what was it that they wanted their daughters to get out of their education?
At first, no one thought that women not only needed college but should have it, because there really was a feeling that was well into the 1800s that, if you'll forgive the delicacy of saying this, that women only had so much bodily energy. And if they put a great deal of their energy towards intellectual issues, that wouldn't be enough for their reproductive capacities. And so they actually worried about this. The AAUW has a terrific role in this as sponsoring one of the first studies around the turn of the 20th century to say, wait, women go to college, they do marry, and they do have children. There was really something that they called race suicide. There was such a concern that women's health would be affected by going to college that we were concerned about that. So once we got through that concern about health and about women not being as skilled intellectually as men, it was more to say, well, if they can go to college, they can be better wives and mothers. So that was really women's entry in, was the thought that they could make a difference in their own families. And then little by little, I think we'll talk about this as we talk about fields, it was really the opening of teaching as a profession for women that really kind of opened the doors completely.